Welcome to another exciting episode of the NIDS View, a weekly show of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, where we are advancing peace, promoting stability, and helping you to think deterrence. Each week we will discuss and analyze a recent topic and provide insight to how it affects our national deterrence. The view of the hosts and guests are their own. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome back to another great episode of the NIDS View, a podcast of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, where Jim, Curtis, and I debate, discuss current topics, interesting articles, things that have happened as of late. And of course, that's what we'll do again today. And probably the biggest thing that's happened here recently is the Department of Defense is no longer. It is now the Department of War. And, it's sort of like, I wonder if, the change from Department of Defense to Department of War is a lot like, when the Army went back to its, sort of 1945 uniforms. They picked the uniform for the last time they won a war. And I'm wondering if changing to the Department of War is going back to the last time the U.S. won a war. And therefore, we're sort of nostalgic as we, face what is perhaps our greatest threat since, I don't know, maybe it's the greatest threat ever, but we're in a new era with the Department of War. And so I thought we'd just discuss that today, go ahead.
Adam, you just brought up a great point, and I'm sure Curtis will agree with this, that if we're going to go back and say that's the last time we won a war, we also change the name of another service that used to be called the Army Air Corps, because that's the last time we won a war. I like this idea. I think it would work out well. Curtis?
That's a clever response. I'm not sure how to respond, how I would respond to that.
Well, I guess maybe you could say the Air Force won the Cold War, perhaps. I mean,
perhaps. Although Jim will tell it was the Pentamic divisions and these sorts of things, right?
You got it.
So it's a big change. I'm not sure how this is going to stick. I've read a couple of legal scholars who have said, "Hey, you can't just do that." The president, the DoD was established by Congress. It was established with the, 1947 National Security Act? I forget what year that was. Yeah, 47. And so therefore, the president doesn't have the authority to, sort of do what he wants. And therefore, this will have to be addressed by Congress. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not 100% certain whether that's true or not. As we well know, the Constitution and the powers enumerated in it are apparently very flexible and open to interpretation. So this may be another one of those examples. So in terms of the name change, what say you guys? What's your take on the name change?
Well, who's that to?
Go ahead, Curtis.
Why don't you just jump in?
And I've already got shocked from Adam when he started talking about the most important event, because I thought he was going to talk about, Taylor Swift and what's his name, Kelsey Grammer, Kelsey, whatever.
Travis Kelce. Since you
Kelsey
mentioned
Grammer.
that is going to be big.
Right.
My question is, are Travis and Kelsey, are Travis and Tay-Tay going to have children? That's what I want to know. Are they going to have kids? Because Travis Kelce's retiring this year at the end of the year, so he could be a stay-at-home dad. Yeah. Wouldn't that be great for him?
Sure, I'm sure.
So, so go back to Department of War.
Yeah, so I took a minute to review the president's executive order. The executive order signed on the 5th of September. This was President Trump's 200th executive order. I don't know if that's a lot or not. I just find it's interesting that it's the 200th order. And it basically adds these secondary titles, right? So to kind of get around the statutory issues, what they're going to do essentially for a while is execute a DBA, right? A doing business as, right? So we have companies all over, right? Alphabet Inc. does business as Google. Meta does business as Facebook, and so forth. We have lots of these examples. I could go on and on. But so essentially we'll have the Department of Defense does business as the Department of War until such time maybe that the statutory rules and laws can catch up. There are already the appropriate legal bills already pushed by both houses to affect the name change legally. Of course, the Republicans have the majority of both chambers, so we'll see how that works through. I think this is very interesting in the sense that in the executive order, the president notes that the Department of War conveys a stronger message of readiness and resolve compared to the Department of Defense, which emphasizes only defensive capabilities. And that restoring the name of the Department of War will, quote, I'm quoting, sharpen the focus of the department on our national interests and signal to adversaries America's readiness to wage war and secure its interests. So I think this is an interesting point because really what this is there is a domestic audience and an international audience. And this is largely about messaging. And I look forward to going into that further as we talk about this. But I have to say, gentlemen, I'm a little frustrated. I grew up in the era of the Department of Defense. Got it. We can debate all that meaning. The Department of War sounds interesting. It doesn't bother me in that sense. But why didn't we rename it the Department of Deterrence?
You wouldn't have to change the acronym, so it would be a cheaper change because everywhere we have DoD
That's very interesting.
Would be a lower cost. Because I served in an organization. I won't mention who they are, but I think the acronym stands for "Didn't they reorganize again?" Every time they reorganize, there's a cost associated with changing all the literature and the website and everything else. So there's so I look at it from a cost. But Curtis, you hit on something.
Right.
We didn't do a lot of show prep today. Curtis and I are back off of travel, and we're just sort of bumping back in here, and we're recording this actually on September 11th. It's a solemn day to think about many things that are happening. But you hit on something that we didn't talk about in the show prep, which was the messaging. And I absolutely am astonished. We always think alike, which scares me. And maybe that's why we don't debate as much here as possible. But there are two messages here, one in the country, in the U.S., and one outside of the country. And so let me start outside of the country. Messaging is so incredibly important. I mean, words matter. I know Adam talks about, going back to his Taylor Swift thing, hurting people or hurting thing. That is a song that he always brings.
Haters gonna hate.
Haters gonna hate. That's right. But but words do matter, and words hurt. Words make a difference in what you're saying, and especially to our adversaries. When you put words out with our adversaries, they listen up. What are you doing? And from an external standpoint, being a Department of War tells you what the focus of that department will be and all the organizations underneath it, that they are, their objective is to prepare for war so we don't have one. By the way, that's deterrence. We are prepared to fight, and we are going to continue the fight, and we are going to win the fight, and that's deterrence. So don't do it because you don't want to be on the losing side. Okay, so that is a message that I think we're extending here, and I think I cannot remember who said it one time. They said if you are always on the defense, you will never win a war. Okay, somewhere along the line you have to go on the offense, and you have to take the fight to the enemy, whether where they are and what they're doing. And I think that's the other message that gets given in this wording of Department of War. Now that's for the external audience. Now, domestically here, and I gave some thought to this because I thought, well, if we don't have a Department of Defense, and what happens here domestically? Because there's a lot of things that happen from a deterrence standpoint, as Curtis was saying, Department of Deterrence, although maybe we do build a Department of Deterrence. But I look at the U.S., and I know we have NORTHCOM, and I know we have SOUTHCOM. Actually, it's not as much involved domestically. It's really NORTHCOM in the U.S. as part of our defense in the U.S., but we have a lot more than that falls under the DoD or doesn't fall under the DoD that is a major component of our defense and our deterrence. And I specifically point to, our National Guard and our Army Reserves that are, in the U.S., but also many other agencies to include the Department of Homeland Security, which maybe could be the defense part of this, along with a lot of what I've been purporting recently is more civil defense. For those on the video, I always point back behind my left shoulder here. There you go. It's try to orient my finger here. This is a real office. This is not a picture. And in my office, I always put all these, all of these Geiger counters, etc. And the reason I put them there is my reminder that there was a time in our country when we thought of defense as also security domestically. And in that domestic security, what we're talking about is being prepared that if we are attacked, we are prepared to survive and then go on the offense, use the Department of War to take the fight to the enemy, which I think we should do. So maybe there's something said there in this piece that I'm sort of throwing out to you guys to think about that from the standpoint of the Department of Defense is going out to fight war. We never want to fight a war in country. Never.
No.
Okay. But if we do, we better be ready for it because we need to show the adversaries that we're willing to take them on when and where they are and however they want to bring that fight, they better be prepared for a massive retaliation or a massive attack from a war standpoint, not from just a defense standpoint. So that was my walk away. When I read this, that's where I got fired up about thinking about this. But I do think that maybe we need to think about the domestic part and putting it somewhere else as we're moving the pieces around. Thoughts, gentlemen?
Well, that's Homeland Security's job. So I think they're the ones who should be, it's like in a lot of parliamentary systems, that's the Ministry of the Interior that does that. And so I would put that there, But do you see any of that, Adam? Do we see any of that civil defense preparing? No,
I have my bunkers and I have my parapets and I have my fields of fire already arranged and I've already, put all my tripwires out and everything else.
Yeah, but that's for the zombie apocalypse. That's a different. That's a different.
You can't kill a zombie.
Story.
But go ahead.
So I mean,
sorry, I interrupt you, but I just don't see that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got rid of more than 90% of shelters. I mean, they're gone. We don't have them. I mean, maybe that's just, the way it's going to happen is that we're going to, we have sufficient underground facilities where the people who matter, who can procreate to rebuild the American population, they will be in those underground facilities. The rest of us, we don't really matter anyways. We're not smart enough. We're not enlightened enough. Well, I mean, but this has already been thought out by a benevolent, all-knowing government, and so they're going to get the right people in those bunkers, and then everything will be. We may die, but this society will, exist underground. There's like TV shows and movies about this stuff, so we're going to all be good, and therefore, this is why we don't need civil defense. And I think this whole thing got, Herman Kahn made your argument for you, 60 years ago, and he lost that argument. And so, that's where, Tom Schelling, he won the...
Did he? Did he really? Because if he did, we wouldn't be talking about Golden Dome and other things like that.
Yeah.
Let me just add to this here. I don't know if you've noticed, but there is actually a www.war.gov. It is the new website.
Wow.
And I pulled up their mission statement. The Department of War is America's largest government agency. With our military tracing its roots back to the pre-revolutionary times, the department has grown and evolved with our nation. Our mission is to provide the military forces needed to deter war and ensure our nation's security. Period. That's the mission. So I go back to my first question. Why are we not the Department of Deterrence? If this is the number one mission, this is the one that's called out here. It doesn't say to deter war and, if necessary, fight our nation's battles. Yeah, it's deter war and ensure our nation's security.
I
So
would
there's
never
defense
wanna-
indicated in there.
I would never want to call it the Department of Deterrence because that is a terrible name. Because the simple fact is, deterrence is an outcome. It is not an end state.
That is true.
It is an outcome. It is an outcome because you know that I am going to do bad things to you, and that I have the will and the capability, and therefore you say, as you like to say, yet not today,
Not
my
today.
friend. And so I don't want deterrence to be the desired outcome. I want it, to be the desired end state. It's a byproduct. It's a byproduct of me being prepared
Yeah.
and willing to absolutely murder everybody. that
So
is a
is
threat to me.
deterrence, the byproduct of deterrence, better achieved with the Department of War title or a Department of Defense title?
Department of War.
Okay, so I see this as a projection, right, of more realism. This understanding that we're projecting the understanding of the need for the power to hurt versus the projection of reactive defense.
It was never a
when
Department
I think about
of
these
Defense.
words.
I mean, we never fight at home. If we were constantly trying to defend the American homeland from those dirty Canadians, or from Mexicans coming north, then maybe it would be the Department of Defense. But we go 6,000 miles away. I mean, where are we talking about fighting now? We're talking about fighting like 13,000 miles away to defend Taiwan. That's the big problem now. And
Right.
so that we do not engage in defense.
Yeah,
we
although-
engage in offensive war.
Although, from a standpoint of fighting, I'd much rather fight in Taiwan than, Tacoma. So, I had to come up. Remember, there are cities that start
was a
with
close
T,
one.
and it's
Yes.
a good one. See, I did pretty well. So, yeah, I'd rather. So I think that's the view. Although I still agree, it's the department. You're still fighting a war, and we certainly want to fight elsewhere with our interests abroad. And from a national standpoint, I'd much rather deter a war here by fighting it elsewhere. I mean, that's sort of the argument. And we can. I think we've actually discussed this. Did we do that really in Iraq? Is that really what we were doing? What was our business in the Balkan Wars, et cetera? My point is that that is a strategy, but I still believe it's war. Although I do want to go back to my original comment that, I don't want to spend money making it the Dow. Okay. I want it to remain the Dodge. So maybe the Department of Destruction or the Department of Death. Those are also options that could, be put on the table if we wanted to let people know really what they're going to do.
Well, it was, and why
messaging.
don't we call it? It was the War Department. It was not the Department of War. It was the War Department.
I actually liked it as the War Department.
I want to go back to the War Department, not the Department of War. And what's ironic about this whole thing happening now is that it's all happening at a time when, relative to the rest of the world, we have less capability than we did, throughout much of the period when we were the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
So we're beefing up the language at a time when we sure ain't beefing up the capability. And so it's, it's kind of ironic that, or is it like, a lot of like European powers where, because they have very little capability, they parade a lot. Oh yeah. So, I mean, whenever the capability isn't there, that's when you sort of, you peacock a lot. And I wonder if that's what we're doing.
Well, I want to go back to the original point because I think you pointed out, Adam, is there's a domestic message and there's a international message. And I think the international message is easier to understand. But I do think that making it, I like your idea of the War Department versus the Department of War. The War Department or Department of War or Department of Death, whatever we're going to call it. But there's a messaging in the U.S. that we need to make, that needs to be made so that the public is behind it sufficient so we do regain a lot of the strategic capability that we need, that you're talking about, that we've lost over the years. The public has to be behind it because we are a republic, and we have, voters have to know what to vote for and what they're behind. And the wording matches. Now we need to find out how to message it to the people. So how does that happen when we look at it from a Department of War? Because I know people have gone apoplectic. We're the Department of War. We're going to be, bombing everyone. Like, well, if we need to, I guess we would. And we need to have the capability to do it. That was an interesting conversation I had. If we did have to bomb someone, some organization, some country, whatever, because they've threatened us into, post-apocalyptic destruction,
we just did that.
Yeah. So what do we need to have, and how do we message that to the public so that the public is behind the leadership and the leadership is able to make that happen? Because in the end, whether you like it or not, there's politics involved here. What are your thoughts on how to message this to our general public on the value of the War Department?
I don't know that it really matters because I think most things Americans just don't care about. They walk around, they live their lives. They're busier than they've ever been, right? To live in America today, both, let's suppose that there is a family, and that family has, a mom and a dad and kids, which is becoming increasingly less true. But let's suppose that is. Mom and dad both now work. So mom and dad are busier than ever. Kids are busier than ever, right? I've got 2 teenagers, and they're programmed, 5 or 6 days a week, after school. And so people are just busy, and they're focused on their lives, and and they don't really pay much attention to what goes on in Washington, D.C., and which has, largely allowed Washington to sort of run rampant. And Americans just basically suck it up, and they focus on their lives. And, we have people that are not all that engaged. And so therefore, the change from DOD to DOW, I don't know that really that many people care. I mean, they care about, they're going to care about whatever the latest news item is that'll, when we're recording this, Charlie Kirk was assassinated yesterday. That's going to be the main thing that people talk about for 2 or 3 days. And then, there was before that, there was the Ukrainian refugee who got murdered on a metro train. And that was the big, news event for 3 or 4 days. And we'll just cycle through these, and we'll go from event to event to event to a terrible event. And things that go on in DC largely sort of fly under the radar. Nobody notices, and then they wonder why their taxes are so high and they get so little. And so I just think that's what's going to keep happening.
Well, let me add to that. I think the folks who will care most about this are the ones who are going to oppose the president for most reason is to just oppose the president. There is a Politico article that came out the day after the announcement that already had interviews from anonymous defense officials who didn't like this renaming and these sorts of things. One of the quotes was, "We're going to spend a lot of money rebranding." Let me remind the world that under the Biden administration, we rebranded every base that was named after a Confederate general, and no one cared that they spent $60 million doing it. So I don't want to hear complaints about whether or not what's going to cost to change the letterhead. I imagine it was a few simple strokes to redo that website. If you go to www.war.gov, and you can see it for yourself. There's an interesting video on there, and these sorts of things. I think the American people understand that we are in a very dangerous time geopolitically, even though they're more interested in Taylor Swift and Kelsey, the football player. But I would say that the reality here is that we've got to get started on doing some real preparation for a war that seems to be inevitable, because we're not doing the right things to deter it. There was a quote here, it's rare that I agree with the great Senator Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, but he tweeted, or someone tweeted on his behalf, if we call it the Department of War, we better equip the military to actually prevent and win wars.
That was my point.
Yes, sir. I agree. If that's the whole purpose of this is to to energize adversaries and allies alike as to America's new effort to project power, and starting with a name change, then I think that matters. This also goes to the internals of the Department of Defense. So Secretary of War Hegseth, I got that out. All right. Basically, has one of his main issues has been reinstilling the warrior ethos, and he views this as being an important part to enhancing the lethality and the warrior ethos mindset by changing the name, right? So the goal here is to create this mindset. So what comes next? So I know that they've done some culture changes within the military as far as eliminating some of the culture changes that occurred in the previous administration. But I want to ask the question of, are we going to start seeing some real warrior ethos preparation? How about every soldier, sailor, Marine, Guardian get out there with a weapon and qualify more than once a year? Some aren't required to qualify once they qualify in basic training.
That's an interesting point, because most if you look at like the actual combat forces of the United States Army, it's only about 10 to 15% of the U.S. Army. Mm-hmm. The other 80% plus of the U.S. Army is a support force. It's a huge support force. And most don't have sort of a combat role.
The tooth is much smaller than the tail here, and so we need to be looking at those things: fitness, regular training issues, training to fight, these sorts of things. There's not enough of, and oh, by the way, education. Right? We cannot have an ill-educated force. They've got to be smart. The brains between the ears of every soldier, sailor, Marine, Airman, and Guardian is the most critical weapon system we have, is the human weapon system. And if we don't educate them, train them, and orient them, then we can change names all we want, but we're not going to get where we really want to be with regard to warrior ethos.
It's funny you say that, because I'll give you a story that sort of supports what you're saying. So I was in Changsha, China. I was an Air Force guy at the time, and I was in Changsha, China in 2014-ish. And I was at the National University of Defense Technology, which is sort of China's, the PLA's. It's the PLA's sort of AFIT / war college. It's kind of a bunch of stuff. And we were talking about, I was the American representative, and this Chinese general officer came up to me, and they had obviously, they knew who I was and where I was from and what I do, and they had done their, research on me.
They read your jacket.
Yes, and the general says, Adam, I read your journal, because I was in charge of the Air Force's professional journals, and one of them we wrote, it was in Mandarin. And he said, I like your journal. I read your articles. He says, I think we can match your technology, but I don't think we can match the quality of your officers. They think better than ours. And that's stuck with me ever since, because it was the sort of the ability of American military officers to think and act independently, to operate under, command intent, but with independence, that the Russians, the Chinese, nobody else does that. We have an NCO Corps that can operate independently. They don't have that. And my concern today, as I'm watching the reforms of military education, is that we're undermining that in this desired, we're going to return uniformed officers into, the academies. We're getting rid of the civilians in the academies, and we'll eventually get rid of them elsewhere, is that we're going to deny them the ability to be trained and have their minds honed, because we're going to want under this false belief that a civilian is inherently a bad educator, and that you need every educator in DoD has to be a uniformed officer who's often less well trained and prepared to do that very job. And so I agree with your point.
Yeah.
I agree with your point, but I would say in that one area right now we're taking steps backward.
Yeah, let me talk about that, because I've had the pleasure of teaching at the United States Military Academy in uniform, and I've taught at the Air Force Institute of Technology, both in uniform and out of uniform. I did have civilian clothes on, by the way, and so yeah, I know that was a bad picture for a lot of people there, but I agree in that you need to have people that understand and support the mission space and understand the needs of the military, but you do need a breadth. I mean, what gives us the ability to think and innovate is having a breadth of knowledge and a breadth of experiences so that you can adjust based upon that knowledge and experiences, was what we do in our would be doing in our training and operations, and building a professional officer corps and building a professional NCO corps, and teaching the subordinates that profession and that career progression is important to them. And I do think we've lost it over many years. But that's what the function of those military academies are, and that is what the function of some of the military going to civilian universities. I went to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which, by the way, Adam, is a real engineering school. It's not some little technical school that you've told me.
It's like ITT, right?
Yeah, no. You're welcome. You're welcome to apply. Anyway, But my point is that I learned a lot by going there, in the same way that I will say that I learned a lot when I went to the Air Force Command and General Staff College, because I was a senior Army officer, and I learned about the other services. So I got a different perspective, which made me better at doing what I did. That education was really important. So absolutely agree with that, Adam. I want to back up to another thing that you said, that warrior ethos. And I do think, and I've heard, I heard the secretary say this specifically. I think it was at West Point. I'm not going to quote where it was, but he said, we need to get back to, and I think the quote, well, I'm not going to quote it exactly, but I'll just say it the way I think of it. We need to get back to every Army member, and I would say, I don't know if the Navy or the Air Force had it, but you are an infantryman first. Your job is to be able, in the end, I don't care if you're a cook or whatever, in the end, if you're asked to, you need to pick up that rifle and defend your organization in the way that is done, because that's how boots on the ground win the war. Mm-hmm. And we have to have that. And we've gotten so far away from that. So although we have 85% of the tail, which you need the tail to support the head. I get that, Adam. But everyone in that tail has to be able to be, as I always said, the reason my cooks, when I was in Korea, the reason my cooks trained on their rifles, as well as on the machine guns, as well as throwing grenades and all those other components, we were there because if I lost an infantryman or a person on the line, I grab a cook and say, "You're not cooking today. You're cooking a different way.
You're shooting."
And you're shooting. That's the point. We need that ethos back. I'm really excited about that. And so that if we can. My point, Curtis, so and you sort of answered it, is we need to get that ethos, though, into our country. And projecting that into our country is a hard sell because we've been so far away from it for so long. We've got to get back. That's my point.
So look, as we're getting short here, I want to pose one more question to you both here. So I'm going to throw my hand grenade in this regard here. So do you think the name change is going to drive away universities, nonprofits, contractors, think tanks, and others who will no longer want to be viewed as working with an organization who has the title of war?
Yes, it will for some. It will for some. I mean, let's particularly universities. We'll see which university drops its ROTC program first.
You know,
That's a great point, Curtis. I like that. That's a great point.
So I would say yes and no, Curtis. So I think there are some universities who will embrace it because it's part of their ethos, and there are some that'll walk away from it. And that's their choice to do so at their own expense and loss. And I'm okay with that. I don't think we need to be ingraining or indoctrinating our ethos with counter anti-war, anti-views on war perspectives. But I think a lot of that will return, because I'll tell you what they're giving up. You're giving up a scholarshiped, professional, typically mid-career officer or enlisted person who is going to go to school and is motivated to complete their degree, which, by the way, is very hard to find in many universities right now.
Mm-hmm.
You give them a scholarship and turn them loose. The military doesn't do that. Scholarship means you better be successful or you've ruined your career.
Well, we here at NIDS have no problem with the name change, so we're more than happy to do work and research work in the name of the Department of War.
Well, in the context that the Department of War is there to preserve peace, as we are too.
It is there to deter. Yeah. That's the first thing on their mission statement.
Yeah.
Over to you, Adam.
Well, it's been an interesting discussion. We always take it's like a river. Sometimes we get some oxbow lakes. Sometimes we we go in different directions and
meandering. We're a meandering river.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Exactly. But we end up in the right spot. So we did that again today. We have a new Department of War. By and large, it's a good thing. Let's hope that
let's embrace it.
Traditions. Yeah.
Stop scoffing at it.
And let's sell it. Let's let
move.
the public know why it's being done. And that's what NIDS is for, is to inform people about that as we're doing
here. That's right.
So, all right. Well, Curtis, Jim, thanks for another great discussion. And of course, thanks to you, the listeners, for joining us on this episode of the NIDS View. And of course, we'll see you next time. And as always, we want to remind you to think deterrence.
Thank you for listening to the NIDS View. This show is produced under the NIDS Podcasting Network, a division of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. NIDS is a 501c3 organization dependent upon donations to provide this podcast and bring about awareness of the peacekeeping value of U.S. strength and our national deterrence. You can catch all of our podcasts or provide feedback at thinkdeterrence.com. I would like to thank our producer, Kimberly Charrington, our sponsors, and all the fantastic members of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies for making this podcast possible. Stay tuned next week for another exciting and informative The NIDS View.
The NIDS Podcasting Network.